the stars be with you.
Okay, now let's meet our guest. All right, I'd love to welcome my special guest this week. We have Cassandra Tyndall from Australia. Thank you for joining me, Cassandra.
Thanks so much for having me, Melissa. It's great to be joining you from the other side of the world.
I know, it's kind of surreal as I, look at you through space and time from so far away. Don't you love technology?
It's amazing. But you know what? We met a couple of months ago in real life, and that was cool too.
Yes, and that is how I know Cassandra actually is through the UAC experience. And if you have listened to prior episodes of this podcast, you might have heard the one with Jack Marsh where we praised Cassandra on her talk that she gave at UAC on aversion. So now here she is on the show, and I'm so glad to have her and to pick her brain about this topic that we are going to be talking about, which is retrograde tales and Mercury retrograde in Leo in specific. But before we get into all that juicy information about retrogrades, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, if you think I sound a bit funny, it's because I'm Australian. So I have a full-time astrology practice here where I live in Brisbane, and I teach, I consult with clients, and I do a lot of writing as well. So I guess when I'm not, don't have my head in the stars, so to speak, I have a young son whose birthday is today, actually.
Yay!
And so I'm a mum as well. And combining my astrology practice with being a mum and all of those sorts of things that come with that. So, yeah.
Yes, you are. And what a lovely little boy you have too. So I hope he's having a wonderful 4th birthday, right? He's 4 this year.
4, yeah. Having an eclipse birthday today.
I know. How lucky him. Well, and Friday the 13th over where you are. It's funny that we are talking on 2 different days here right now.
That's so true. Going to UAC back in May, it was actually my first time to America. So it was kind of a really unusual experience to leave here on the Wednesday and arrive on the Wednesday. But then coming back, I still left on the Thursday and got back on the Saturday. So it's just crossing that international date line. It's, because I think we're 17 hours ahead of your time zone. So
yeah.
I'm from the future, literally.
I know you are. It warps my brain a little bit when I try to think about this time of things. And we try to time it so we both had some sunlight and some daylight to play with, which is funny because I can see you right now in this morning light. And here I have that kind of like afternoon, evening light coming in. So I love it. So I'm so glad you're able to join me here today to talk about retrogrades, because we have a lot of retrogrades happening right now. We have the Mars retrograde that we are currently in that started, I think, on your birthday, right?
It sure did. Lucky me.
Lucky Cass. And she is also a Cancer as well. So this will be the Cancer show again once while we are still in Cancer season. So I guess before we kind of get into obviously, Mars is retrograde right now, along with some other planets. And then we have Mercury that will be going retrograde on July 25th through August 18th. And we are currently in the shadow phase of that retrograde. So we're probably likely to feel a little bit now. So we're going to kind of focus a little bit on that action that's happening. But before we get into there, it might be good just to talk about, what is a retrograde or what makes a retrograde and retrograde theory and all that. And I think I remember you saying that you had some interesting things to share in regards to that. Am I right about that?
I hope they're interesting. I don't want to kind of, bore people, not that it's boring, but get into the technical astronomical stuff of the retrogrades. But I guess just for people who may not be aware, no planet actually, changes gears and goes into reverse. It's just an optical illusion. So I guess a way of sort of thinking about that is if you've ever kind of been at the train station and that train's just starting to kind of slowly take off, then another train zooms by past you really quite fast, but it looks like it goes backwards. That's kind of what happens, with the planets. And that's what sort of gives us that retrograde or reverse perception. And so in terms of, I guess I have been thinking about retrogrades, for a long time now, and I guess maybe a little bit out of frustration in a way, in the way Mercury retrograde in particular kind of got really simplified, or especially online, social media, as good as it is, it does have its issues, I suppose. And I guess I just kind of, felt that I needed to wave the flag for Mercury. And it's not just about computer crashes and, fritzed hard drives and the like, and cross wires. And I sort of started to really embody or really think about, when a planet goes backwards, what is that asking us to do, or what is that suggesting? And I think for us, Melissa, like in our Western culture and our Western life, we really do put so much emphasis and focus on always moving forward. We're focused on that linear progression of growth and gain and increase and more. So when a planet goes in reverse or retrograde, well, that automatically must mean that's bad, right? It's like, oh no, it's got to be bad. So, particularly if you do kind of buy into what we hear online, and so, I guess for me personally, like I have on paper a really functional Mercury. It's in its own sign. It's in the first house, and it's moving at a super fast speed, at one of the top speeds that Mercury gets to. And I'm like, why do I like Mercury retrograde so much? Because I really, really do enjoy it. And I guess I sort of adopted some of the Indian principles around retrograde motion. And that was that in their culture, which in comparison to the West it is a little bit more internalized or spiritual, or about that sort of introspection and reflection. The retrograde phases can really offer us that time or that space to actually kind of step out of, in this case, the mercurial world, or that information overload that we have. And how can we actually filter or process what is meaningful or what is true in our own mind. So when a planet slows down, it actually kind of has a little bit more power in this way of thinking. And I guess I'll give you an example. Last night I was just taking the rubbish out, as one does. Yeah. And I just happened to look up, and Mars was just this massive red bright light, almost like the nighttime sun. It was amazing. And it's retrograde at the moment and really close to Earth. And so from an astronomical perspective, when a planet is retrograde, it is closer to us. It is brighter. We see it more. It calls for our attention. And I think that is the gift or the beauty of the retrograde. It's not just, the frustrations, which sometimes that can happen when we are conditioned or used to kind of, being in this fast pace. But when a planet is going backwards, it's like, all right, this is a pause or a rest or a reflection. And so Mercury, I find, is really a powerful and much needed opportunity to rest, particularly with this information overload that we have in our lives right now.
Yeah. And I think you're absolutely right. I love how you're saying, and that's okay. Let me break it down. Let me use this slow Mercury I have to break that down with this fast Mercury just said. I love what you say about how it gets our attention, because the only reason that we have retrogrades or, that apparent backwards motion is because of our Earth-based perspective. And that retrograde planet, or at least that, Well, yeah, because it just gets closer to the earth. And so it gets closer to us and it calls to us. But it calls to us to either slow down or to readdress some of the issues that have to do with that planet. Mercury obviously is the one we slow down and reassess more frequently because it retrogrades, every 3, sometimes 4 times a year, roughly. So we get more action with the Mercury retrograde. And like you said, it's all over the media. People have certainly sensationalized Mercury and its retrograde cycle because, who doesn't like something to talk about, and it happens, every how many months, and it's like, oh no, watch out for this now. But I love what you're saying. It's true. It's not something to be feared. It's really an opportunity to realign forward, at least with whatever that planet represents. And right now we have Mars, which is going backwards, that apparent backwards motion, which is, how we go forward in life with our actions. What are we putting our energy into? And now our mind kind of gets to not conjoin because they're actually in opposite signs, but gets to join that retrograde. So this makes me think real quick before we get into like a specific mercurial type of retrograde stuff. What is your take on how personal planets retrograde affects us versus maybe the outer planets?
That's a really good question because I know in the past I used to sort of glaze over the outer planet retrogrades a little bit, and sometimes I would see posts by different astrologers, Pluto's retrograde, or Pluto's doing this, and I sort of think, well, what's the big deal about that? Because it's retrograde nearly half the time.
I know.
So it's, it just sort of seemed a little bit sort of redundant in a way. And so in terms of the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, I think they can be really powerful or really intense if those retrogrades or the stations, they impact a direct part of your chart. And you're going to feel that. And I find those retrogrades don't really pertain so much to external events, but more the internal shifts within you, or those internal perspectives that are quite profound and not always visible to those people around you or those that you love, but they're those, I guess, more like, rather than a perspective shift, a paradigm shift. It's sort of like, once you cross into this territory or you get triggered by Uranus, things are never the same. Or if you get triggered by Pluto, things are never the same. And, Pluto, for example, only really moves through, 2-3 degrees of the zodiac a year. So when it does kind of, grind over a certain planet in your chart, it's a long, drawn-out process. But with the other planets, the more sort of social, personal planets, I think the effects are a little bit maybe, they're quicker. They don't tend to drag out for long cycles of time. And they might also pertain to external events. Mm-hmm. And I also find that they are more like perspective shifts as opposed to paradigm shifts. So, Venus retrogrades, it might, you might have some changes in your taste or your aesthetics or your, Venusian pleasures or your tastes in things. Mercury, it might be about your mind and the way you think about things and perceive things. Mars might start to, what are what are you prepared to sacrifice, or what are you prepared to fight for? Or, it's the more kind of about who I am and what I'm doing. The other planets or the outer planets is more about our relationship with the world or the outer life. So I guess the way I can describe is more perspective versus paradigm. And the paradigm is sort of like where you're orbiting on your own axis for a period of time and until you can sort of like recalibrate. So they're longer, drawn out, and sometimes more profound experiences, whereas the inner planets tend to be, I guess, more of I'm not so much done on the fly, but kind of like sort of can happen while the rest of your life is happening too. But the other stuff you got to sometimes step out of.
And take a minute with it. Well, especially like you're saying, Cass, with those outer planets, and if you're having a significant transit from them, whether it be a conjunction or an opposition or square. When they do station retrograde or direct, that's probably when you're going to see some significant action in that area. So I think you're absolutely right about that. And anybody, we just had a couple go forward. We had Jupiter just went forward. We're talking this week we're actually talking on the solar eclipse new moon right now. We're on the countdown, about 2 hours deep. So we just had Jupiter go direct. And then a week or two before that, we had Neptune.
We did, yes.
As well. So anybody that was having Neptune transits or anybody who's having Jupiter transits at the time probably really felt those stations.
Totally. I mean, speaking of how these planets can affect us, it was, I think, May last year, maybe June, July, I can't quite remember. Why am I so tired? I was like, oh, maybe I'm, overdoing the training, or, maybe I'm not eating enough of this or enough of that. And I said, what's wrong with me? And I just happened to look in my ephemeris, and lo and behold, I had my first exact hit of the Neptune square. And so, of course, that particular, so the stations of Neptune at the moment are really quite noticeable for me. Whereas in the past, it was, not quite as impactful. So, we'll hear astrologers all the time talk about this retrograde, that retrograde, but it might be an energetic thing that you feel or that you can connect to, but it may not really impact or interact with your own life unless it really triggers a chart point or a planet or an angle, or using a variety of different timing tools to really hone in what is going on.
Yeah, a perfect example that, it doesn't affect everybody the same way. And we have to keep that in mind as we talk about these things. Like, it's not a blanket, experience that everybody's going to have. So it really is chart specific. And that's why it's good to contact your local astrologer to see what's going on in your chart. Because it's so funny. It's so funny how you look at the ephemeris and you're like, oh yeah, the Neptune square. I find it funny as astrologers that sometimes we don't even see the transits sneaking up on us until the time. And it's like, oh yeah, that's right.
That's it. Particularly with Neptune, it's like, oh no, wonder I didn't know.
That's hilarious.
So doctors make the worst patients, and sometimes astrologers make the worst astrologers of our own chart. So we don't always, sometimes you need a third eye on your own chart to be able to see sometimes what's very obvious.
Yeah. Well, especially when you're focusing on other people's charts or the mundane astrological weather, you tend to forget to look at your own. And then before you know it, maybe something that you saw a few years ago when you're like, oh, that's coming down the line. And then all of a sudden it's here. And that's how my Pluto transits hit me, but that's for another podcast.
So I'm in one of those too.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm not alone. Oh, I'm sure I'm not alone because, any cardinal sign has probably been feeling, cardinal sign up to 20 degrees has probably been feeling some Pluto action over the last handful of years here.
For sure.
Lucky us. But right now, I think the fixed signs are really feeling some things going, because we have Mars retrograde in Aquarius. It will eventually move to Capricorn, but it's still in Aquarius. And then we have this Mercury retrograde we're about to talk about, who is also in Leo. And then Jupiter is in Scorpio. And so basically all the fixed signs, which is Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius, they're the ones probably feeling a lot of what we might be talking about here today, I think.
Totally. And I guess one other thing to point out with the Mars retrograde, it hasn't happened in Aquarius since 1971.
Yeah.
So for many of us, this is fresh territory that we are working with, or unless you were born prior to 1971. But this is sort of breaking new ground for a lot of us, and doing these Mars things in a part of our life where we haven't done it like this before.
Yeah, and especially if you're someone like me who has a Mars-driven chart, there's a lot to reconsider. It's in the fourth house, so it's got some power right now, and with its angularity. And so I am certainly feeling it. And it has a lot for me to reassess with my own energetic drive. And so sometimes that is necessary, especially if you're someone like me that has been kind of go, go, go since day one in life. like you're saying, I've never even had a Mars retrograde in this point. So I feel like I can kind of release certain energy that no longer suits me in old motives or drives that I once had to kind of reinvigorate that Mars foundation that I stand upon. At least I hope so. But it'll all manifest different for everyone, I am sure. So let's talk about this Leo Mercury retrograde here that just happens to be dancing over my own Mercury now that I notice it. So, I mean, is there anything off the bat that you're seeing themes that might appear for this particular Mercury retrograde?
Yeah, well, I guess you can't really just talk about a Mercury retrograde without sort of realizing or contemplating who is he? What's his purpose? What does he do? And I guess one of the ways that, I think Mercury and I think conduit to the sun instantly. Like he is the vehicle of our divine expression or our inner wisdom or that intelligence that is not about, whether you can remember the times tables or not, but more about how we express that innate inner wisdom and that self-awareness. And so Mercury is going retrograde in the sun sign. And so I think that is a really, this particular retrograde, collectively, I think is going to really be about reflection of the self, first and foremost, and maybe working through some of the ideas or the self-talk, the way that we see ourselves, the way that we express ourselves. And if you think about, Mercury, the sun is sort of the king or the center of our solar system. So Mercury's kind of got the king's ear, if you like. He's that as I said, that vehicle of expression. And so he's neutral. He just gathers information and takes information. And as we sort of talked earlier, we are in a very mercurial world, so information overload. And I'm just flicking through my feed on Facebook this morning, and I can start to see these threads of this upcoming retrograde, and we are now in that retrograde arc or the shadow period. So sometimes I find that that phase is more potent or more suggestive of what it's all about. And so with this information overload, Mercury retrograde is actually our time or our cosmic invitation, if you like, to actually step back from all this information and all this data and all this gathering and go, okay, well, what's true for me, or what's factual for me, or what's right for me. Because, without kind of like the bias of our own self-talk or our own ego or the bias of what we want to project out, or so we don't speak in a way that we get what we want from people, or so we can remain that sort of neutrality. And I guess another thing to consider with this particular retrograde is the squares to Jupiter. And what is opinion or bias versus what is actual fact or truth, okay? And so I think these, when we think about retrogrades, regardless of what the planet is, they kind of a bit reflective of the significations of the planet itself. And so Mercury is very fast, it's very slow, it's variable, and information comes at us, and data and knowledge comes at us. We're just hammered by it these days. So to be able to step back from it and to sort of go, okay, well, and in your own mind, sift through or process all these information, all these sound bites and tidbits and quotes and opinions and eat this or don't eat that, or, this is true for this. And, or we get just told what to think all the time. The Mercury retrograde is an ideal time to process and work out what is truth or factual for you and your divine expression and your divine wisdom and that innate self-knowledge. Otherwise, it's just this regurgitation of data that eventually becomes dogmatic.
Yeah.
I think this is the challenge with the Jupiter square is, am I just repeating or regurgitating all of these facts and this information and this data? Or have I actually done this Jupiter process of integrating all of this from a place of wisdom as opposed? Yeah.
Well, in Leo, we're talking about that authentic self, right? Or, for some,
Yeah.
so is what you're expressing and what you're sharing, and, is that parrot talking? Is it coming from the authentic self? Because I totally agree with you, Cass. There is so much that honestly, even on my own Instagram, and I'm sorry for the people that I follow on Instagram, I don't look at it because I can't. Just to produce it is how much enough that it's so hard for me to go in and then take part of it because I don't even know where to start. And I think that's a really good point, especially pulling back from that for a minute, and especially reassessing what it is, that you're taking in from everything that's coming in. Because you're right, Mercury is neutral. He's neutered. He's neutral. He's about yeah, that is true. He's about that. He's about that data, and so what we're picking to take in? Is it part of our authentic expression? And if it's not, then it really doesn't have any place for us. And like you're saying, what is true with what it is that we read and see? This issue has been on the table for quite some time now, and I have a feeling you're right that it will be kind of reared back up once again during this time.
Yeah, and I think I guess what I see from the outside looking in terms of, I guess, not to kind of, get on this tangent too much, but, collectively and in America particularly, like there's this real paradigm shift around the old dogmas and what we've always been told was true or believed was true, and kind of just gone on that autopilot with that. And I think this Mercury retrograde with these squares to Jupiter, especially Jupiter in Scorpio, it's really like that digging deep into the sort of bowels of the mind or bowels of wisdom and, what is actually truth? And, whether that's on the collective or from a personal standpoint as well. And also being brave, that courageous Leo to voice that too. So, and I feel, at least within our community in astrology, it's the Pluto in Scorpio generation are really coming through. And, no doubt they will kind of carry the torch for this retrograde as well. And perhaps those with Uranus and Scorpio too, about what is this breaking new territory and voicing that new experience that is, as you said, that authentic expression of Leo.
Yeah, I think we're going to be tapping into a little bit of that as we retrograde back because, Leo is a very creative sign. It's a fire sign. So we're retrograding in a fire sign, which I believe wasn't our last one in Aries, right?
Yes.
Remembering correctly. So we're having a couple fire retrograde retrogrades this year.
We are.
And fire is kind of that's that principle of initiation. It's a start. It's that intuitive faculty. It's that creative, something that is born from a space that is nothing to some extent. So I'm wondering how that will play in the retrograde if, going back over our creative expression or if something's trying to be birthed or reconsidered or I don't know. I just was thinking creatively because that's how my mind works.
and no, you're totally right. And I mean, if you think about the element of fire itself, it is about, it rises up. It can't be kind of, if you think about a raging fire, it's out of control. But it also has that real, and that's kind of, I guess that more positive or negative, depending on where you are with that. But fire is one of them that was considered anciently the most divine of the elements. And it kind of was what brought you closer to God.
Yes.
And it was the light. and that sort of, coming back to that sort of the wisdom of the sun, that essence.
I love that.
I think there'll be a lot of opportunity to explore that, and also to, if something doesn't hold that truth for you or hold water for you, you'll just be done with it. Particularly with the Mars sort of playing out there as well. What are you prepared to sacrifice for? Or, what are you prepared to discipline yourself for? Because, even though there's not that sort of direct interaction, by sign, they're all playing out together.
Yeah. And I find it so appropriate that we're experiencing, we will be, we're not quite there yet, but we will be experiencing this Mercury retrograde alongside with this Mars retrograde. Because, especially if we're talking about fire signs, how many times have you heard, you act before you think, kind of thing. And so we get to go back now in our apparent backwards motion to reassess, where we're acting and if the mind's on board and is it aligned with who we are today? And like you're saying, does anything need to be cut from that in order to go forward? So I think of this as a really strong opportunity period that might not seem so on, especially if we sensationalize it and be like, oh, retrogrades, they'll, mess up your whole life. I feel like these two together might actually put us on track more so than anything with our lives.
Oh, so much so. And I've really been thinking about, I guess for you guys, it's the summer of retrogrades, and for us in Australia, it's the winter. And, I guess in my client work, I've sort of just had this whole Game of Thrones thing in my mind, winter is coming and we just got to get through the winter, and then, the retrogrades will sort of alleviate, and then we'll have the nodes will change, Jupiter will change. It'll just be this sort of this lift, this change. So I guess, be thinking about this whole collection of planets in retrograde right now. And, Venus is yet to come, but that's another story.
Yeah.
And I think about Mars, this Mars, Mercury as well. And, Mars being, yes, the act of severing and, sacrifice and things like that. But it's also kind of like about discipline. And I know Saturn often gets attributed to discipline, but Saturn is the commitment, the ability to go, okay, well, this is what I want long term, whether that is, saving a bunch of money or, losing 10 kilos, whatever it is, right? But Mars is the discipline to sacrifice what you want now for what you want long term. And so I really think that this whole Mercury, Mars, and that sort of wisdom and truth element there with Jupiter too, it's what are you prepared to sacrifice now? And remember that Mars is in Saturn's sign. Mars enters Aquarius in 2020. So I really feel that in some respects, this is a bit of a prelude to, even though they're both Saturn ruled, Saturn in Cap, Saturn in Aquarius, it's going to be very different when it goes into Aquarius. So I just feel that, even though things feel really stagnant now, like driving with the handbrake on sort of thing, I always, when I think about the retrogrades, I remember a long time ago in my early 20s, and I went to work Christmas party, and I got a food as one of those old school Chinese restaurants, and got a fortune cookie. And I didn't really like my fortune in this cookie, and but it always resonated with me. And it was the sooner you fall back, the longer you've got to catch up. And I think that this, summer, winter, whichever side of the globe you're on, it is that catch-up time to really realign yourself with what it is that you truly want. If you think Saturn is the last of our planets that we can see with the naked eye, and Mars is retrograding in Saturn's sign, there's something in that, in this Mars retrograde for that longer term commitment of the Saturn in Aquarius. So, and the fact that Mars hasn't been retrograde in Aquarius for such a long time. Yeah, there's a little bit, it's sort of a broader brushstroke looking forward, but I really do feel that we are planting the seeds now for the Saturn in Aquarius cycle to come.
Yeah. And then when do you know when 2020 is roughly?
We do have a taste of it in 20. I did
19.
actually jot the dates down.
That's okay. It's so far ahead. I don't expect any of us.
It is and it isn't.
I know, right? I know. That's absolutely true.
I know that's a scary part of it. So we do get a hint of it in sort of 2020, and then I think it really kicks over in 2021. So, that's only a couple of years away. Like, just looking at the ephemeris now. So Saturn enters Aquarius in, towards the end of March, just after the equinox there. So it's only 18 months away, give or take. So,
which is interesting because we just about, as we're talking today on our new moon solar eclipse, which is happening in Cancer, it's kind of a prelude to some of the eclipses that are going to be coming over that period of time, and how that south node is going to be in Capricorn, hanging out with Pluto and Saturn as well. And so I think you're definitely on point for the switches and, the adjustments that are going to happen within that axis, and then moving forward from that with Saturn going into Aquarius by then. So that's interesting.
Yeah, it's a little segue there.
Yeah, I know. We're going, see, astrologers, you're always thinking about the future. So
I don't think it's just as sort of streamlined as Mars just, retrograding in Aquarius. It's next we've got as you said, the prelude of the eclipses today. Mars, there's a lot going on in the next sort of 18-month period. So, and I just, maybe for those who are a little bit more, know about their charts and transits and things like that, from the top of my head, Mercury last went retrograde in Leo, I think maybe 2012.
Well, it dipped back in for our Great American Solar Eclipse last year, just for a taste, a 2-degree taste.
A 2-degree taste tester. Yeah, so I guess, contemplate what was going on in your life, around the eclipse, around 2012, and there could be some repetitive themes, tie up of things around there too.
Yeah, I'm going to have to go look at 2012 because that was a significant year for me, and especially having my actual Mercury in Leo. I'm going to have to go check that out.
2012 was a massive year for me. Massive.
Was it?
Yeah. So I had a lot of other crazy transits happening there too. But when I think about the Mercury in Leo too, I think, this is the thing with astrology. You can't just look at one thing. You've got to kind of see it as a collection of things. So that's I guess some food for thought in terms of what the Saturn in Aquarius cycle. There might be some snippets or previews or insights to what might eventuate for you then during this Mars.
That's interesting. I can't wait to find out. So far, Saturn in Aquarius or Saturn in Capricorn. We're Cancers, obviously when it's going to be opposing your sign, Saturn can be a little. I'm not crazy about it in Capricorn because Capricorn, and I'm diverting from what we're talking about here, but I'm just thinking about, because we always talk about dignity and when a planet is strong in its sign. But where does that strength lie? Is it helping you? Is it not? These are just my own personal musings as it opposes my Venus currently. But
well, Saturn is plumb opposite my Sun right now and at 4 degrees. So I'm sort of thinking the same thing, it's almost like, Saturn's just doing Saturn. It's not ruffling any feathers. It's not causing any waves. It's not, initiating things. It's just a bit of a grinder, really. It's just doing its thing. And
just kind of have to adhere to it.
Like, exactly. It's just, it's this kind of like do as you're told, Cass, kind of energy. That's kind of how I'm hearing it anyway. It's like, don't color outside the lines. Just, stay within the shell, particularly the Cancer.
That's funny, especially with Mars and Aquarius right now. We're not necessarily willing to color inside the lines, particularly. But now to pull it back to our dear Mercury retrograde in Leo, let's think about, what are some tips to work with the energy? We talked about, not taking it like it's a do or die type of thing. Number one,
No.
don't buy into the sensationalism of it all.
No, I mean, look, I still think those tips are worthwhile. Like, I do try and remember to maybe back up my systems, or, just make sure that, I wouldn't, if you need to get a new phone, It's not a big deal. Although a couple of years ago when we had a retrograde, I did have to get a new mobile phone. And I don't know why, but I just had, it's like, okay, time for a new one. I went and got it. And Mercury had stationed that day. And this particular Samsung that I got was actually a lemon. Like it overheated. It just turned on and off all the time. Took it back. And, a couple of weeks later, it took a bit of time before, my phone company would come to the party with the problem and so on and so forth. But I ended up getting a better deal in the end for it. So, sometimes you will have those snafus or those confusions or those things that are just a bit of a pain in the neck. But if you can kind of just wait it out and be patient, then you can often get something a little bit better in the negotiation or the deal at the end. So I feel that, those type of things are still, you don't need to rule your life around those sort of things, but, be mindful that, a few glitches may happen, if you're traveling or buying things or, wanting to, the big things. One thing, I make sure that my child goes nowhere near my technology during this period, because I think he has ruined something of mine. Broken USBs or broken hard drives every Mercury retrograde almost since he was born. So
that's
since
funny.
then it's just no children and technology. But on a more going on a more internal or more profound note, I suppose. I do try and avoid social media during these times. It's not always, it's a part of our life whether we like it or not, but I will just maybe check my notifications and, connect with the people I want to connect with. But I intentionally avoid just the mindless flicking, killing the time from standing at the supermarket, waiting for my turn to check out. I'm not just flicking to fill time. So I do try and be mindful not to do that and just allow that the joy and the pleasure of my mind just being in the moment. And I think that reducing distractions is a really ideal way to work with this energy, and just be, I guess, aware or conscious of what thoughts bubble up and then just let them go. It's almost like not being in a constant state of meditation, but when you do really get to that point, whether it's yoga or different types of just quietening the mind, it really does allow you to sort of connect with that inner wisdom, that sun's expression. And I just really try and eliminate distractions and just really connect with things that are really meaningful for me, like my truest friends or those that I can really talk to and communicate with, or I'll read books more rather than just the monkey mind stuff.
The mind, yes. No, I totally.
How about you?
Well, I think you're absolutely right about maybe the theme for this summer is patience, especially with that Mars retrograde, Mercury retrograde. Frustration could likely be in the air because, things happen, like you're saying, like you said, with your Samsung Samsung phone. You got to limit at first. Because the thing with Mercury retrograde is a lot of times it's not that we can't do anything. It just doesn't really go smoothly off the bat type of thing.
Right.
And so we kind of gotta work with that a little bit. But I totally agree with your idea about, stepping back from that, especially that social media sphere. And I mean, I don't know if I'm shooting myself in the foot as I'm very much involved in it, but it's true.
We all are.
I know. It's true because, if we're talking about Mercury retrograde and it has the ability, or it has the beauty of it is we're allowed to reassess and go back in and process, mentally what we have encountered in the last, handful of months since that last retrograde. If we have that constant distraction, like you're saying, because I can't even tell you, you look at a line of people, like you're saying, waiting in a grocery store, how many are like, it's kind of sad to be honest.
Yeah.
And so we have to allow ourselves that space, like you're saying, to be able to even have those insights and that review that is so fruitful during this time, because you don't put the phone down or you don't turn the TV off, or, especially with fire, and it's, that sun's energy, like you're saying, like it's an eternal thing. It has to rise up, like you were saying earlier. And we're going to be shoving it down and not even giving it the chance to rise up unless we create the space for it. So I really like what you're saying there. Plus, I think, with Leo, especially since the world's been so tense, like recently, but farther than recently, it seems like I don't even remember when it was intense now. But that fire signs have that spontaneity in it and that kind of playfulness. And especially Leo, maybe like that childlike nature a little bit more.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking maybe if we can just, like you were saying earlier, be in the now, be in this moment, be a little more spontaneous within reason, of course. But let loose a little bit,
Well, maybe just, I mean, of course, it's going to depend a little bit, where Leo is in your own birth chart.
True.
But it's maybe call a friend instead of just messaging them, or, take that time out. And, it's such a gift to do that. And I feel that, many people don't, because we're just in such a grind of Groundhog Day, getting things done and never having enough time. But, to be able to eliminate some distractions and allow yourself that peace and that, that joy as well, that Leo really wants to bring to the table. With the Mars opposite that, it's just, elimination, cut things out and, kind of allow yourself to be in that joyful moment. And, but that's, my intention, at least for this retrograde, is to, just to enjoy, rather than messaging on Facebook or sending an email, even if it's just a Zoom call or a WhatsApp message, just so there's the voice, there's that, the phone calls, the connections, just having a little bit more sense of meaning behind, keeping in mind there's that Jupiter piece there as well. So there wants to be that integration and that, it's just stationed. So it's still a really intense energy right now, Jupiter. So, Jupiter also brings the sense of that joyfulness and that exuberance to the table as well. So it might be about like overstretching yourself a little bit or getting out of your comfort zone and pick up the phone for once instead of just, texting or what have you.
Yeah. Add a little more personalization and intimacy. Like if we're talking about Jupiter, Scorpio type of thing, maybe, going a little deeper rather than that superficial type of conversation or connection with someone.
I almost forgot the art of that, don't you think, too? And wasn't the UF experience just reminded us how important that face-to-face communication and the energetic exchanges is so intense and so powerful. And so I think sometimes we can rely on our technologies to kind of do that for us. And, in so many respects, it's a gift and it's amazing, but there's also the human part too.
Yeah, which is also a gift and what really makes life special, being able to connect with another person, because that connection then leads to that joyful experience, and which, we're trying to kind of draw out or reconnect with, in some way. Because if we can kind of reconnect with our joy and what kind of lights the heart up during this time, that will also help Mars's job of what to cut or where to act next. So it kind of helps us to align with the heart mentally before we take action.
That's a brilliant, brilliant point too. Yeah, we'll get that. When we can bring that joy back in, we will have that clarity and perspective about, it helped to eliminate a little bit of the confusion as well.
Yeah.
I really like that. Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you. I acted it out along the way. I felt the thing,
It's those little tidbits that you can't quite prepare for.
Oh, yeah. No, it just came to me.
Flashes of insight.
That's perfect. All right. Well, I think we've covered plenty of things, Mercury retrograde and retrogrades, and even Saturn and Aquarius, which we didn't plan for, but hey, added bonus.
See for a little bit of, down the track.
Yes, absolutely. It fit in rather perfectly, especially since we are in eclipse season. We can't forget that. I know we're not talking about that here today, but that is still brewing all that energy. So there is a lot of dynamic change that is going on right now, and shifting. So it's good to cover all these bases, I think.
And about 1 hour and 10 minutes to the eclipse now.
Yeah. Ooh, we're getting close. I feel it. I don't know. I'm a little tired. I don't know about you. You just woke up.
Well, the last couple of nights I haven't slept as well as I would like. And I just think it's that eclipsey sort of feel. And I think just the experience last night, as I mentioned earlier, of taking the rubbish out, and he was Mars, this, massive bright light, and it just made me sort of think about, what the ancients must have, when they're starting to work out what all these planets are doing and what they mean, and that would have just been such an intense and an amazing experience. And we sometimes forget about the sky. What's actually happening up there, whether you're an astrologer or not, and its power on us. So maybe the Mercury retrograde is a little bit of an opportunity too to switch off the electronics perhaps and connect with the more universal energies, or, and the humane ones too.
Yeah. So, lest us not forget, as above, so below.
Exactly. Yeah. So, it's definitely intense times, and winter is coming. It's here for us, and it is the kind of I don't know how it feels energetic for you guys. Being in the summer, which is a lot more active and outdoorsy and a little bit more exuberant overall. But with all this retrograde energy, is it feeling like regular summer, or has it got just that little bit more of a different,
I might not be the best person to ask, because I live in my own little bubble of, and I don't know, I feel, and I might not be alone with this. I feel like there's been so much active energy and just movement that even taking in the seasons or knowing what month it is, I'm like, it's already almost the middle of July. I swear it was just the New Year's the other day. And so which is another reason to slow down, because I've even lost, track of, those great cycles that help align us with, with the year and the changing of things. So that's a really good point to think about, because the summer's here. And the only reason I knew the summer was here is because last Friday we had this incredible heat wave come out of nowhere. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. It's the middle of July. And so yeah, I feel it, but I also feel like I need to, pull back a little.
Yeah, for us, it's kind of different, I suppose, with all this retrograde action, and it's winter. It's just hibernate, get through the winter, and then then it's all over. And
that's a good point, actually. That winter. Yeah.
I've always just been curious how it would feel in the north, because it's, the summertime, but all this energy of retreat and pull back. And I found myself saying to clients a lot over the last few months, we just need to get through this winter, which, trust me, where I live is not really winter. And and then, it's Jupiter and Sag, the nodal changes.
Yeah, November. I think November.
Yeah, it's sort of like light at the end of the tunnel comes in November, for sure.
When you're starting your summer, and then we'll be starting our winter.
Uranus dips back into Aries, so we've got this, a bit more fire there, and so it's interesting. Just I feel that these retrogrades seasonally are probably a little bit maybe easier for us to be integrating.
Yeah, or at least this one in particular, based on our lineup. All right. Well, I think that we have done our job here. So I want to let people know how to find you. Where are you at? What do you got going on? Give us.
Sure. Well, I mean, of course, we've talked about the joys of social media. So yes, I have Facebook and Instagram, and trying to up the ante a little bit on Twitter, thanks to some of my astrological peers. So you can find me there. Cassandra Tyndall is usually, you'll find me there. My website is cassandratyndall.com. What I've got coming up, so next weekend, which is the 21st and the 22nd, I'm actually speaking at an Fresh Voices in Astrology Summit run by Astrology University. So it's a 2-day online conference. It's free astrology. So really, prompt you to sign up for that, to register for that. So that's Fresh Voices in astrology.com, I think is the website.
Yes, I'll put a link to it in my blog post.
Thank you. So you can sign up for free and attend the conference as it happens. And there's also an option, I think it's called the All Access Pass too. And if you are in Brisbane, I am running a transits workshop on Saturday, July 28th. And we'll just be exploring how the moving sky interacts with your life. So it's an introduction to transits.
Lovely. And then further on down the road for us people here in the U.S., you'll be at NORWAC up in Seattle next year, right?
I will be, yes. So looking forward to coming back. Yeah, I know. I am so excited to explore the West Coast because I have some fabulous astrology there. I'm starting to really get into the locational stuff. So I think it's going to be a wonderful trip and I can't wait.
Oh, yes. I can't wait either. And for you astro newbies out there who knew, where you are, your location also affects your chart as well. So that's another fascinating part of astrology and for another podcast. So thank you so much. Yeah, right. That's funny. All right. So where can you find me? Well, you can find me at energeticprinciples.com. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Energetic Principles. I have not taken on that Twitter game yet. I have an account, but I do not use it. I do not look at Twitter at all, but I know a lot of people do. They love it.
I know. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. And
you'll get
maybe
that
can be a Mercury retrograde experiment.
There you go. And then you'll know how to approach it going forward. That's funny. Yes, perfect example. And as far as things going on, I'm kind of laying low during this Mars retrograde, but I do always have my things online. I have my Patreon service with the tarot subscription, if you're interested in that. And of course, I do personal consultations. And that can be here in San Diego in person or locally anywhere in the world. And as a reminder, if you like what you hear today, feel free to share it with some people, spread the good word. And if you feel so inclined to leave a review on iTunes, I greatly appreciate it because it helps me get a little more visible in the astrology world. So, all right, everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. And as always, may the stars be with you.